And there we go. Now the camera's broke. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Happy Saturday. Get this right. Let's get the camera fixed. I knew it was going to do this. All right, so go over here. And, oh, and you can see my wall over there showing. All right, that should do for now. All right, here we go. All right. Happy Saturday, everyone. This last week hasn't brought me a whole lot of stuff going on at all, so it's been pretty quiet. At work, I got our default templates for presentations for teachers and all that sort of stuff, for the most part, changed to be accessible, which is awesome. And that's about the only thing that's happened this last week. I started reading the book on the physics book by, who is it? Robert England? Jeremy England, who's basically writing about that life can come about as a natural part of physics, as a way that matter will find a way to, is always working to find a way to dissipate energy more efficiently. And in the right circumstances, that can mean the creation of life as an efficient way of dissipating heat and energy. So I'm only like 30% of the way through that. I have next week, I'm taking off Friday for Veterans Day, and then that whole next week I have off for my birthday. And I will be reading that 700-page book on everything, The History of Everything by David Graeber and Robert, was it David England or David Hebrand, I think? I don't know. I'll be reading that during my birthday time. So that's what I have going on. How about you guys? What has your last week brought you? Anything interesting? Yeah, I started late. I didn't have as much. I'm just not prepared today. Not prepared as well as I need to be. All right. How have your guys' week been? Anything happening? Some climate stuff. We've got a video, some articles here talking about Neom, the Line City in, I think, Saudi Arabia. And we've got a great video breaking down the issues with it. And then we'll go into some degrowth, some articles on degrowth, economics, and that sort of a thing. So that's what's coming up. Any questions, comments, or suggestions before we move on? Yes, everything is on fire. All right, let's go ahead and do this. All right, so it's from The Observer. This is from October 30th. COP27 Climate Summit, a window for avoiding catastrophe is closing fast. That's happening next week, starting tomorrow, I think, starting Sunday. Yeah, well, it's this next week. So we'll hear some useless information come out of there, but we'll see how that, see if anything of value comes out of there. The effects of global heating could soon reach a tipping point, but scientists fear that the meeting in Egypt will become bogged down in recriminations, as it should. Finger pointing should be pointing to the global north, much as I've bitched about on this channel. It has been an alarming time for climate scientists. One by one, the grim scenarios they had outlined for the near future have been overtaken by events. Extreme storms, droughts, floods, and ice sheet collapses whose sudden appearances have outstripped researchers' worst predictions. Catastrophic climate change is happening more rapidly and with greater intensity than their grimmest warnings. It transpires. In much as I've said, we don't really have the technology to get an accurate understanding of really how to model the climate or even how to model climate change. And we are so unaware of how bad it truly is much like they're saying, things are happening much sooner than they can predict, which means that the situations that we are currently in is always going to be much, much worse than what they are projecting here. So much as they've said that we're pretty much near the point we're going to go over some of those tipping points, I'm like, well, we've already tipped over those. We are currently in the end of days at climate scales, and we are just waiting for our understanding to catch up with the fact that we're totally and completely fucked. We are in the sixth great extinction, and our science might not ever catch up enough to understand that human extinction of all life on this planet, the next 200 years or so. And if it does get there, it will obviously be too late. Examples include this summer's record high temperature of 40.3 degrees Celsius in the UK, a massive jump of 1.6 degrees Celsius. On the previous hot day, torrential rains that triggered the most severe flooding in Pakistan's recent history, and last year's Hurricane Ida, one of the most destructive storms to have struck the US. It's not that global temperatures have risen faster than expected. The problem is that the effect of this rise has been unexpectedly extreme. Many of the impacts of climate change, such as increased weather extremes, are now playing out faster than predicted, even though the warming itself is very much in line with model projections, said the American climatologist Michael E. Mann of Pennsylvania University. This point was backed by Johann Rockström, director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. Without doubt, extreme weather events amplified by global warming are coming faster than predicted and are more severe than predicted. The impacts are there to see: the disastrous floods in Pakistan, the failure of the rainy season in Somalia for the past 4 years, and highly destructive wildfires in California, he said. Camp for internally displaced persons in Baidoa, Somalia, in February this year. The Horn of Africa is facing another famine. Yeah, it's the global south is the ones who are going to suffer the most from it. These unanticipated events are occurring in a world that is currently 1.2 degrees Celsius hotter than it was in pre-industrial times. And temperatures are likely to continue to rise considerably, despite nations pledging at recent IPCC summits to do everything to hold increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Yeah, no, this is nations are not pledging to do everything. They're not. Much as I bitched about COP26, it's nothing. And I've written about COP26 that it's really nothing unless you are doing things to the extreme that my policies are talking about. Then they're effectively voting for human extinction. And what you find in these Congress of Parties, these COPs for the past 27 years, is that the global north comes here, and if the global south was actually to stand up and try and hold them accountable, the global north would never show up. And there would be nothing, there's nothing of real value in these meetings. It's good to have them, right? Just for the coverage. But ultimately, last year was the first year that they were even able to mention fossil fuels. And the largest demographic that was there were fossil fuel lobbyists. I was the group of people that had the largest showing at COP26 last year. And part of what the COP agreement has to have is ultimately the United States specifically, Britain specifically, and Europe specifically has to throw trillions and trillions of dollars, literally trillions of dollars, to the global south. Help them bypass the fossil fuel age and shift directly into the sustainable energy age. If they don't do that, we have no chance. And it's just a matter of waiting for the horrors, much like we're seeing in Pakistan and various other countries, the droughts in Somalia, where people are going to become hurt because of climate changes, and the refugees are going to start, and all hell is going to start breaking loose. Whatever it is they talk about is not trillions of dollars, basically per country, then there's no point in it at all. This figure could be breached in a decade, says scientists. The result will be even worse droughts, heat waves, floods, and disease patterns than those now being experienced. But that is not all, says Rockstrom. He and his colleagues have recently published research that indicates that by the time a global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius is reached, there would be a significant risk to 4 major systems. These systems include the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet, which will start to disintegrate, added Rockstrom. The end result will be sea level rises of several meters, though that could take many, many decades. Well, many decades is still nothing, because just meters of increase is going to get rid of lots of property, and it's just going to be bad. So bad. In addition, the permafrost systems of Canada and Russia would start to thaw and release their vast stores of methane, a greenhouse gas many times more potent and dangerous than carbon dioxide. Finally, at the rise of temperature rises above 1.5 degrees Celsius, all the planet's tropical coral reef systems would start to collapse, the group found. Yeah, and we're in Alaska. Much of that. Gang mine, how you doing, man? Good to see you. How you doing? I'm not at all prepared today. How have you been? Started reading a book on I'm tired too. I've been eating too much Mountain Dew and Reese's peanut butter cups, so I'm dealing with all of that. I finished a novel by Dan Brown, his Origins novel, and I started reading a physics book on by Jeremy England, which I think it's Everything is on Fire, or Everything is Fire, talking about the theory that life could naturally occur through physics, through matter wanting to find a more efficient, matter always organizing in such a way as to find ways to dissipate heat and energy as efficiently as possible. I remember reading an article on him like in 2014, so physics in life, right? Yeah. Well, it's part of how I got onto this was that, yeah, that's exactly right. It's climate change, I was doing research. No, I was listening to the Moneyless Society podcast, and they were talking about syntropic farming. Now, someone mentioned that. Oh yeah, I've been reading Growing Up in Scientology from Mike Reinders. It's a book about, that doesn't sound pleasant at all. Yikes. Is it as bad as we've heard it is? I'm sure it's probably worse than what we've heard. In Moneyless Society, someone mentioned, Marlo mentioned syntropic farming. It's horrific. Oh, I bet. Yikes. So, and I didn't know anything about that, so I did some research on syntropic farming. And it's basically kind of a form of permaculture that involves growing trees and then pruning the trees and using that as biomass to act as a fertilizer or something like that. It's I don't know that much about it, just a little bit. But then I thought about syntropy. But the book. Okay, good. Yeah, finding interesting stuff to read can be difficult, but when we find it. So I wondered if syntropy and entropy were related, and they are. Entropy is the tendency of things to break down, and syntropy is kind of the opposite of that. So I found out that was a thing. That reminded me of that article on Jeremy England, which research on that got me to the book Origins, and now I'm reading Jeremy England's book. And interestingly enough, all of this has something to do very much with, my work in writing or researching and potentially writing a change in my philosophical pillars. So I'm thinking of putting entropy in there as one of the pillars. So I'm researching that, writing about it, trying to figure out what I'm going to do as far as that is concerned. We'll see. So next week I'm taking Friday off, and then the week after that I have off. I'm taking off for my birthday week. Does the book go into assembly theory of life? I don't know. That's what I'm only like 33% of it. I've only read 33% of it or so, and he's just kind of going through some of the basic physics to understand how to have this conversation. I'm hoping towards the end he'll get into much more depth into his theory. So I know he's an MIT scientist, and he's working on computer modeling to try and find where, this point would be where lifelike things might start to assemble. We'll see. When I get done with that, I'm hoping to finish it next week, but I don't know. It's interesting. It's really interesting. I've only gotten, in this last week, I've gotten 33% of the way done, so I probably won't finish it before next week. So for the next weekend. So we'll see. We'll see.
Two alien civilizations coexisting on a planet. What's that look like exactly?
Holy shit, 4 hours? That's pretty long. Let's see. The
following is a conversation.
Oh, okay. Okay. The origin of life on Earth and alien worlds. Okay, cool. I will take a look. It's gonna be hard to fit this one in. It's 4 hours long. Oh my god. But okay, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'll see if I can clear out the time to listen to that. Yeah, not for the stream, yeah. So yeah, for my birthday week, I've got a book I'm going to be reading. It's 600 pages long. It's by David Graeber, the late great David Graeber, anthropologist, and Wengrow. He's an archaeologist, talking about the variety of ways in which Paleolithic and Neolithic societies formed. It wasn't just hierarchical, just egalitarian. It's a broad range of things, and that will have direct use for me in also what I'm writing about humanity's journey from abundance to scarcity and back again. So a whole bunch of research reading, which should be useful to my understanding, but also to my writing and politics and stuff too. So that's mostly what I'm doing. I also signed up for for master class as well, for 1 year at least. So I'm looking, because I want to get into novel writing, and I've worked on that before, and I'm taking Dan Brown's master class, and I'll probably take Neil Gaiman's and someone else's master classes too for writing, and just keep trying to plug away at that. I've got a fantasy novel I'd like to work on, or two, trying to get that in my brain so I can figure out how to actually put a plot together and actually write one, because it's masterclass. Yeah, masterclass. It's this one here. Dan Brown. Oh yeah, these are mine.
From being bad than you do from being great. I talk about it in my my autobiography. It's like, anyone can be great.
Yes. That's exactly right. And I think Obama has one on there too. So it's a bit suspect, right? Because they're on there. Yeah, that's I saw them on there. It's bad. That's not good. But other stuff in there is interesting. So we'll see how well this goes, and if I can make any progress on writing a novel of some sort, or at least novellas. I've got a series of 5 novellas I'm kind of contemplating, which would potentially make up a full novel. So I'm just kind of messing around with that. We'll see. maybe next year for National Novel Writing Month, I'll attempt to do that. So we'll see. We shall see. Just need time. I can't exactly take up a whole month of vacation. That's I think that's all the vacation I get. No, actually, no, I think I only get 2 weeks of vacation currently. Is that right? Yeah, about 2 weeks vacation. So yeah, that wouldn't be possible. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'll fit that in when I can. So currently we're reading about climate change stuff, and then we'll get into Neom, that Line City, and I've got a really great video here that kind of breaks down the issues with that. We've covered this before, but we'll go into a little more detail on it. And then we'll get into some degrowth stuff. That's kind of what I've got planned here. Yeah. A little bit scatterbrained, but we'll get through it. All right. Do you have any other questions or thoughts before I continue with this COP27 stuff? Hoping to have some coverage next week, next stream of on COP27. See if anything of value comes from it. Only hope. Nope. All right. Had your chance. All right. It would mean that we would be handing over to our children and all future generations a planet that will be sliding irreversibly towards possessing fewer and fewer places to live, Rockstrom said. Which is right, because it's going to get hotter and hotter in the south, and those environments are going to start shifting to the north. And then the ice and snow and stuff in the north is going to start melting and going away. Here in Wisconsin, where I'm from, South Central Wisconsin, it is really mild here. Like typically in October, we would be sitting here within, 2-3 feet of snow, at least 2 feet of snow, 1 to 2 feet of snow when I was growing up. Now, we'll be lucky if we get snow for Christmas. So, yeah, it's going to get worse. The planet is teetering on the brink of meteorological disaster, giving a desperate edge to the opening of the COP27 climate summit in Egypt next month. This was written, I think, October 30th, so it's just a few days ago. The task facing delegates was starkly underlined by the UN, which reported last week that the world is now on track for a 2.8 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures. It also accused nations of wasting a year because they failed to deliver ambitious emissions pledges that had been made at the COP26 summit in Glasgow last year. Yeah, it's This point was stressed by Bob Ward, policy director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. Climate change is already damaging millions of lives around the world, including the UK, and is an increasing threat to the economic development of poor countries in particular. It is critical that governments at the COP27 summit recognize that the risks of loss and damage are accelerating. Scientists warn that if the world is to have a chance of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050, so prevent the breaching of the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, global emissions will have to be cut by 5 to 7% a year. At present, emissions are rising between 1 and 2% a year, with little sign of that increase being halted. Finding routes to carbon cuts should therefore be a priority for COP27, scientists insist. However, the summit is expected to be dominated by contentious discussions about the compensation that poorer nations believe richer nations should pay them for the impact of climate change. Global heating has been caused by industrial nations that use fossil fuels to make themselves rich. And it's not just making themselves rich, but rich through colonialism, slavery, and imperialism, and things of that nature. The argument is that they should now reimburse those countries that are suffering from the worst vicissitudes, good word, of climate change. So, these are known as loss and damage claims, and they will be a key focus of next month's summit. Somehow I doubt they will be. I know they, I wrote my commentary on the COP26 thing, the Glasgow Accord, which was it was pathetic and weak. That they've mentioned quite a few times in there that, hey, the North should pay the South for stuff, but that's it. It's just a mention, but nothing concrete. And my policies talk about this, right? The global North needs to pay the global South reparations in trillions and trillions of dollars. It's the only way we can help save humanity from extinction. And if that's not the level that is going to happen, which, exactly, there's no way they will. And much like I say in my post there, that if the global South, if the countries of the global South actually went there and said, hey, this is what has to do to save humanity from extinction, the global North will say, yeah, no, we're good, and then walk away, and then they won't come to another one of these conferences because they're not going to pay their part, because capitalism. Yeah, that's pretty much what I put in my post too. If countries in the global South actually went there with demands, the global North nations would never show up. They just wouldn't come, because why? We'll see. We'll see if the wording within the Egyptian Accord is going to be any more strict or demanding than the one from Glasgow. I doubt it, but we'll see. We shall see. You can imagine what will happen when the Pakistan delegation presents its claim for compensation for floods that have just put a third of their country underwater, said Rockstrom. Oh, so yeah, maybe this is the way that's going to end up happening. As countries get devastated by climate change, they're going to start bringing the bill to the global North, in which they're not going to pay, but this might be one of the sort of socioeconomic tipping points for the global South to start casting off the chains of colonialism and capitalism. It's too late. In the long run, it's not going to really save us, but be interesting to see if that has anything to do with it. You can imagine the number on that invoice, and I think developing countries have a really justified argument in making these loss and damage claims, but it's not going to be a very constructive debate because it's very difficult to move forward on an agenda like that. This point was backed by Professor Stephen Belcher, chief scientist at the UK Met Office. At this point, the need for action is clear. He told The Observer, there is still time, but my gosh, the window of opportunity is closing fast. And much like I talked about earlier, is that we don't honestly know what that window is because our computers, our modeling can't accurately predict where we are in that. So as far as I'm concerned, we've already overshot everything. The negative feedback loops have kicked in and we're just in the end of days and we're just watching it. The only way to even have a chance at making a change to reduce the harms to humanity is by doing what my policies say. Trillions and trillions of dollars every year to the global South and to the individual countries to shift to sustainable energy. You need to tax the shit out of the rich because they are one of the largest drivers of climate change. My policies go all through that sort of stuff. I'll throw in into chat my environmental policies, which is one of my biggest policies there. Check that out and see what my thoughts are on that. If you guys want me to go through it, I can go through it. All right, there is that one. Yeah, Greta Thunberg's book is out, and it doesn't come out in the US until like February or some shit like that, which is really, really annoying. But it's actually, well, the book has just one thing written by her in it, I think. And then the rest of it is climate scientists and stuff like that. It's more of a collection of essays and stuff like that. All right, this is from October 30th from Reuters. Greta Thunberg, COP27, an opportunity for greenwashing, lying, and cheating. Now, I'll share. But here's the article with talking about Greta Thunberg and Abby Martin at COP26. And she said something similar from COP26. And here's my kind of coverage of the Glasgow Pact, too, if you're really interested in seeing what I'm saying about that. And in there, I do talk about the reparations aspect quite a bit. All right. London, October 30th. Climate activist Greta Thunberg on Sunday called out next month's United Nations Climate Summit in Egypt for being held in a tourist paradise in a country that violates many basic human rights. Yep, that's true. And to be fair, most countries in the global north are also of that as well, especially the United States. Speaking at the London Literature Festival at the South Bank Center, where she was promoting her new book, The Climate Book, 19-year-old Thunberg dismissed the looming climate summit known as COP27 as an opportunity for people in power to use greenwashing, lying, and cheating. Yes. While Thunberg did attend protests in Glasgow last year for COP26, she said she won't attend COP27, scheduled to be held from November 6th to November 18th. So it's just short of 2 weeks. So it starts tomorrow, and tomorrow's Sunday, and it goes to the 18th, which is next Friday. Right? My brain, yes, the next 2 Fridays. And it's in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. The space for civil society is going to be extremely limited, she said. It's important to leave space for those who need to be there. It will be difficult for activists to make their voices heard. Public demonstration is effectively banned in Egypt, and limits on accreditation and attendance badges for activists have been a point of contention at previous UN climate summits. Thunberg rose to prominence in 2018 at the age of 15 by staging school strikes in her native Sweden, becoming the face of the youth activist climate movement. During Sunday's event, she decried the sustainability crisis as a crisis of information not getting through. Her book includes explanatory articles from over 100 climate experts, including renowned climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe and Michael Mann, as well as authors including Margaret Atwood. I wanted it to be educational, which is a bit ironic since my thing is school strikes, she said. And one of the master classes is Margaret Atwood. She's in there too. As a note. Asked to comment on recent protest actions by Just Stop Oil activists, which saw them throw soup at Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers at London's National Gallery, Thunberg said, "People are trying to find new methods because we realize that what we have been doing up until now has not done the trick. It's only reasonable to expect these different kinds of actions." Yes, an iconic quote. Yes. Yep. Yeah. We'll see. It's Pan Urban African, how you doing? Yeah, I'm glad you made it too. We're doing some climate stuff, and then we'll get into the Neom, the Line City in... I don't even know where it is. Where is it? Not Egypt, is it? Oh, did you? Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a while since I posted anything, and I've got probably 5 years worth of books there, or not books, of posts that I need to work on, but I just haven't had a chance. And I've got 2 other things I've been working on writing and researching too. So it's just this. My blog is just this huge list of posts I haven't finished yet. Various forms of draft. But good. Anything specific that really caught your mind that you appreciated? I do have to finish my post on daylight saving time before they end it. Otherwise, they'll end daylight savings time, and then my post won't be of use anymore. So I do have to, at some point, sit down and finish that. I have one of the last 25% of that to write. I've done most of the research. I just have to finish looking through the research and write it. I think I'm to the point where I'm talking about the potential quote energy savings of daylight savings time, and then getting through the ending of it. Someday I will. Okay, well, that's the end of that one. Okay. All right, so now we're going to move on to, so any questions or comments on climate change and environmental policy and how we deal with it and that sort of a thing before I move on? Because I have a lot to say on that. My environmental policies do speak a lot about that. Got 2 articles here on the Line City, and then we've got this amazing video by this architect talking about the issues with this Line City. I know we've covered this probably once, just kind of, it's a thing, but we'll get a little more detail going through this. Anything? Really informed? Okay, good. Glad to hear it. That is my largest policy page. There's a lot there, and it's just it's frustrating because we're obviously in a state where human extinction is an issue as a potential result of what happens, and the governments don't care for the most part, and especially the United States, which is potentially, arguably, one of the greatest examples of unbridled capitalism in the world. And the result of that is not much is going to get done, because if we don't say it's okay, then it doesn't get done. Much like I say when I talk about this, unless the Disco Rat, how you doing, man? Welcome. If the United States is not the global leader on climate change, then nothing is going to get done. The moment the United States decides to not be the largest terrorist organization in the world, and then they decide to be the world's leader in climate change, everything changes. But it's just not going to happen. Requires the United States to be part of the solution. All right. So now we're going to talk about this Line City. What is the Line? The 170-kilometer long mirrored metropolis Saudi Arabia is building in the desert. Let's go over this. Have you guys heard about this? I know I've covered this once. Here's kind of a picture of what they're thinking. It's like 170 kilometers long and 500 meters high. City that's just straight, cuts right through Saudi Arabia. This is what they're proposing. They actually have a website for it. I'll go ahead and throw that in here too. Here. This is the website for it. There we go. Okay. All right. Yes, it is. This is the official website for it. This is their official website, and they're looking for investors, partners to help work on this. And it is neat, but as we'll go through in this video, she does an amazing breakdown of the issues. I thought of similar things here, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that conversation about the issues with this, because there are many. All right. As climate change rapidly advances, many Middle Eastern states are aiming to make the transition from carbon-based economies to alternatives that attract people from around the world, tourism, business, work, or to live. One such example is a development known as NEOM, to be built in Saudi Arabia. The key part of the plan is, quote, the line, a $725 billion futuristic city designed to house 9 million residents. It comprises a mirrored wall-like structure. Oh, it's 200 meters wide and 500 meters tall. To be built in Saudi Arabia's northwestern Tabuk province, the project will extend 170 kilometers inland from the Red Sea across coastal desert, mountain, and upper valley landscapes. So this is $725 billion to build one city. Now, and this is for 9 million residents. So that's, how much is that a person? 725. Can I do math? By 0.009? It's 80. Is that right? 80,000 per person? Would that be around the number of residents London has Googling residents of London? Could be. That's like when I was looking at numbers for like what I would be spending on a city. If I won $1 trillion, 500 billion would be invested, and the other 500 billion would be building that first city. I didn't have any idea about what the numbers would be, or like what population would be. So we're looking at, so 500 billion would be about 7 million people, maybe 6 or 7 million people, it looks like. Yeah, that's a lot of money. And like the entire military budget could be working on this technology, because the military budget is what, $800 billion? We could be building a city like this, which is significantly better than this, and have that technology to keep building more cities after this. All right, the line claims to set a new benchmark for sustainable development. Its footprint is just 34 square kilometers, less than 4 square meters per person, occupying a fraction of NEOM's 26,500 square kilometer site. This allows for a lighter touch on the landscape than would normally be expected for a megacity. In addition, the NEOM project includes an airport, shipping port, industrial areas, research centers, sports and entertainment venues, and tourism destinations. Analysis man, what are you doing? Yeah, it does. We're going to cover 2 articles on this, and then we've got a great video of an architect kind of tearing apart the issues with it, much as I've been annoyed with as well. Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. It's been a while. MBS reign and grip of power will not last, making the project very doubtful. Right. And it's going to take a lot of investors to make this happen. I don't think it's going to happen either, because there are significant issues with the project. It's great to see someone's thinking on this scale. And once we get through the video over here, I'll talk about kind of, how I would approach this as from the standpoint of my policies and resource-based economies. So we'll kind of go through that. But yeah, they're gonna need lots of investors, and like you said, they're probably not gonna get them because there are significant issues with it that make the project problematic. The line is touted as a post-carbon eco-city, but the scale of its ambitions raise serious question about whether the project can deliver on its environmental, economic, and social goals within just a few years. Then my sound just died. I'm not sure why it does it while I'm streaming. But let's go ahead and watch this video. Let's see if I can. I don't think this one's any good, actually.
For too long, humanity has existed within dysfunctional and polluted cities that ignore nature. Now, a revolution in civilization is taking place. Imagine a traditional city and consolidating its footprint, designing to protect and enhance nature. The line will be home to 9 million residents and will be built with a footprint of just 34 square kilometers. And we are designing it to provide a healthier, more sustainable quality of life. The line's communities are organized in 3 dimensions. Residents have access to all their daily needs within 5-minute walk neighborhoods. And the line's infrastructure makes it possible to travel end to end in 20 minutes with no need for cars, resulting in 0 carbon emissions. By leveraging AI technology, services are autonomous, saving you time and effort. Designed by world-leading architects, the line is 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide, 170 kilometers long, and housed within an elegant mirror glass facade. Intelligent solutions create efficiency and year-round temperate microclimate with natural ventilation. Energy and water supplies are 100% renewable. The line is designed as a series of unique communities, offering a wealth of amenities, providing equitable views and immediate access to the surrounding nature. With 40% of the world accessible within 6 hours, at the heart of the globe's key trade routes, a place for commerce and communities to thrive like nothing on Earth seen before. The Line, the city that delivers new wonders for the world.
All right, there you go. That was a good overview of what they're kind of planning on there. Living so closely is probably is most the same. Right, and when you look at kind of my thoughts on this, building up and down is the way we need to do, and that's in my policies. They have a good start on how to do it, but they're doing it out this way is problematic. They need to be going up and down, and then that will solve most of the problems with it. And that also gives you, depending on how high you go, they may give you closer access to space as well. So that becomes another advantage. Yeah, it's not completely terrible, but it has significant issues, which it's going to fail just because they're choosing a line. They're choosing a line. That's the primary problem with it, is that format. If they're going up and down, it might actually work really well. But the video that we're going to go over here, that will talk about many of the issues. A line means you have a nice view. Yep, yeah, definitely. There's a huge surface area, so everyone can have a great view. Definitely. That is an advantage. That could be done in larger structures if the living areas were put to concentrating on the outside of the structure. And then you have like the green spaces and businesses and workspaces on the center. Like a maintenance nightmare if the whole line is completely connected. Well, it could be. I mean, any large scale construction like this is going to be a huge maintenance problem. And there was a video I saw on this that kind of showed the way they were kind of thinking of putting it together was similar to kind of how the Venus Project thinks about it, which is like the bottom part is maintenance, then you've got kind of a transport layer, and then you've got, everything else put together, which is a good thing. But yeah, it's something this large and interconnected is going to be a challenge to maintain it because of how big it is. But it's really kind of the way we need to go. Once you have all the sensors connected and you have the Internet of Things, the whole sensor and feedback infrastructure, that will make it easier to figure out what needs to be fixed, where, what caused it, and that sort of a thing. But that is still a something that hasn't been done, like a real smart city. Bill Gates has his $80 million city he's working on somewhere. You have solar panels on the roof and power the whole building. Right. Yep. Yeah, there's lots of ways to power it, especially with that. If they're outsides, that mirror surface is solar. That would be a way to power it too. Actually, having it on top probably wouldn't make quite so much sense, unless you were able to have a transparent solar cell where you could let the light in, or just for lighting purposes. But on the mirrored surfaces, that is where you'd want to put the the solar panels on, because that's going to have just shitloads of sunlight. Yes, exactly. Solar windows. Exactly. You wouldn't even need necessarily that, but that would be useful. Transparent solar panels, but also on the places where you're not seeing, you can just put the standard solar panels on there. Yeah, there's lots of really great ways that you could power this, especially because of that, because it's formed like that. All right. The devil is in the details. Yes. At first glance, the project appears environmentally impressive. The urban edge is no more than 100 meters from any point in the city. A high-speed electric public transport service ensures no part of the line is no more than 20 minutes away. You have no shadows. Well, because of the way it's constructed, because of the line, if the light goes through, okay, sure, but if this isn't like very transparent, then you're gonna have a lot of shadows on the inside at least. It's all gonna depend on what this how this will function. If it's transparent or not for the light. Yeah. High-speed electric public transport services ensures no part of the line is more than 20 minutes away. So this is pretty good. If cities like this concept actually is a viable way to combat against climate change, it is. At least I believe it is. That's kind of the basis of my policies. And if you take a city like that, right, exactly, don't need a car, which is huge. Electric transportation, just in my policies, that's what I talk about. We need to design our cities from the ground up to enable, we need to design cities from the ground up with mass transportation. That's the way we need to do it. And the only way we can really create our cities to do that is to build them like this, brand new, mass transportation is the center of it, as well as all the amenities included. Yes, definitely. Definitely. Residing in such a gargantuan structure implies a claustrophobic lifestyle. No, it doesn't. But in theory, each resident would enjoy an average of 1,000 cubic meters of urban volume. That's much more generous than most dense city living environments. Your infrastructure shit? Yeah. The issue with almost all infrastructure is that very unhealthy to our planet. Yeah. It's typically the cheapest way of doing things is the way it's done because it's about money. It's not about sustainability. It's not about, creating roads that last, hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's not about technical efficiency. It's about market efficiency, about cheapest, most profitable way of doing things. And that's the way it's going to be until we start looking at creating cities like this from the ground up as the standard way of. Yes, yeah, that's exactly it. The car-centric infrastructure, that is one of the main reasons that things are so fucked up, because if we didn't have cars and we had mass transportation, we probably wouldn't need most roads, and that would vastly change everything for the better. So, and that's one of the reasons why, Elon Musk, we're not a fan of him here, and that's part of the reasons why we're not a fan, because he's getting on board and promoting electric vehicles and not electric mass transportation. It's all about capitalism, baby. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why Greta Thunberg was talking about that COP26, 27 is just greenwashing. And that's all it really is. And that's exactly right. Because it's all about nothing's going to get done unless there can be profit made from it. And the things that actually need to be done, cities like the line, but done better, which is what we need to be doing, it's never going to get done because it's harder to profit from something like that when it's very efficient. Redesigning in such a gargantuan structure implies okay, so we just read that. So yeah, one of the things when I talk about, I'll go ahead and share this with you, my post here on how might a resource-based economy come into play. And one of the things that has to be done with that is doing the calculations and also the research on figuring out what is the amount of space that people need in their lives to be happy. We're talking about how much space per person inside their housing, how much green space, how much other social space is needed. So we have to do that sort of a math. Now here we're talking 1,000 cubic meters per person, which is 3,000 cubic feet, which would be 1,000 cubic feet of housing plus maybe 1,000 cubic feet of green space plus another 1,000 feet of like other infrastructure. Unfortunately, as in many high-density, high-rise buildings, a sophisticated vertical transportation system would be needed. The structure is equivalent to a conventional 125-story skyscraper. Yeah, and in stuff like this becomes a big space issue, because getting elevators the larger you go, the more area you need for elevators. Unless we can find another way of vertical transportation that doesn't take up so much space. Elon just takes all the credit when he's just abusing government subsidies, contributing to neocolonialism by robbing resources from developing countries, and more behind closed doors. Yeah, that's exactly right. And he's heralded as a revolutionary, a brilliant engineer, when the stuff he's doing, don't get me wrong, the technology that they're creating in Tesla, it's amazing. It's leaps and bounds beyond anything that's been done before. I mean, it's great engineering. Really, it is. I mean, it really is. But it's not being applied to the things that matter. It doesn't need to be applied to cars. It needs to be done to mass transportation. If he was serious about humanity and doing good for it, that's what he'd be doing. It's all about the monies. Yes, pay $8 to get a Twitter check mark. Yep. He's doing what all Fortune 500 companies do. We just have someone to blame for it. Yeah, someone who's very vocal about wanting the blame. Tesla FSD is pretty broken at this point. FSD, what is that? Yes, yeah. I've heard. So cars are running into buildings and stuff like that, which I find kind of ridiculous. Like, I think they're relying too much on the fully autonomous section, and they aren't giving enough priority to any of the sensors that might be on the car itself. Because if the self-driving says run into the building and your local sensors are saying, hey, there's a fucking building there, we probably shouldn't do that, well, that's what you should take priority in, at least. So they need to work on a better way of prioritizing sensors, or if they don't have sensors locally on the car and they're just relying on GPS, I think that's a huge problem. There needs to be localized sensors on these to make sure that GPS isn't suiciding cars into things. That's a huge problem. Okay. The project costs also seem modest at $55,000 per resident. Okay, so this is I calculated $85,000, but they're saying $55,000. Okay, let's say this is achievable in a country with much lower employment costs than in developed economies and only relates to infrastructure. Even then, it remains to be seen how ultra high-speed transit and cutting-edge infrastructure and services within the most massive building ever constructed can be cost-effective. Well, that's just the problem. You're asking the wrong question. It's not about cost-effective. And this is one of the big issues with capitalism, because it's about cost. It's not about how it affects humanity. It's not about how it affects the natural world. It's all about the fucking Benjamins. It's all about money. Not about what's best for the environment. It's not about what's best for the people. It's all about the green. Okay, Neom. We're comparing South Korea's capital Seoul with our revolutionary new city. Did you know that the land can accommodate the same population as Seoul with only 6% of its urban space? Okay. Infinite growth goes burr. Yep. Infinite growth goes burr. And that's the problem. And that's when we get into degrowth, we'll be talking about that a little bit too. The linear design underpinning the line is not a new idea. The Spanish urban planner Arturo Soria y Mata developed a linear city concept in 1882. This concept allowed great efficiencies in infrastructure such as water, electricity, gas, and transport by incorporating it along a narrow linear urban corridor. The key plank of the design was to ruralize the city and urbanize the countryside. Okay. The line echoes this concept, however, one wonders about its impacts on the countryside. How might a continuous 500-meter high mirrored barrier reflecting the desert heat and light and cutting across the landscape for 170 kilometers affect local biodiversity? Yes, and that is a huge part of the problem. A huge problem. That mirrored surface is just going to basically bake anything within hundreds of meters of it as it reflects the light from the sun. The line appears to be oriented along an east-west axis. This may be optimal for solar thermal management, but is likely to cast a large shadows midwinter. So you got right here. Wow, it's along that whole province. Well, this is right next to the Sinai Peninsula. Here. We're here. Environmental and community impact. The line aims for zero emissions living. Energy comes from renewable sources. Green hydrogen earns export income. Wastewater is recycled, and it features the latest in smart city technologies and mixed-use buildings. Car ownership is eschewed in favor of walking, cycling, and public transport. However, the materials and construction of such an enormous project could be very emission intensive. Yes, this is an issue. And this is going to be an issue. This is going to be an issue no matter what you do, until you change, your large-scale policy on construction. And it would take decades and decades of research to get to the point where we could have very low emissions construction. And this is something that people are working on now, but we are nowhere near the point where construction is going to not have a carbon footprint. There isn't much you can do beyond this. Not much you can do about this right now, unfortunately. Concept claims no one would be more than 2 minutes from nature. In other words, the urban edge at ground level. But does this consider the waiting times for a lift without careful design? A high reliance on vertical transportation may stymie hopes for genuinely walkable or bicycle-friendly precincts. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why integrating green spaces at every level is going to be very important, so that we don't have as much of that problem. Like every level should have, 1 or 2 or 3 spaces that have a significant amount of green space that people can go to. The wonder of a city with a perfect climate all year, some 170 kilometers long and stretching across the mountains, desert, and coast. Okay, let's see what this does. That was short, whatever. All right, the line may be developed in modules, but whether these would correspond to neighborhoods is not clear. And will individuals, businesses, and other entities have creative reign over how their designs are expressed? Or will all parts of the city look much the same? Good questions. And you'll have these very same questions when you talk about a resource-based economy. In my post where I talk about capitalism and resource-based economies Q&A from 2020, I answer questions like this from a capitalist apologist. Go ahead and throw that in here in case you want to kind of see some of those, to read about that and my thoughts on it. construction of just the World Cup stadiums were heavily inducing, and more importantly, cost many lives. Now imagine, yeah, and that is one of the big complaints, even about my policies, that building cities from the ground up, much like they want to do, is it's going to have that problem, and there's nothing we can do about it. The first few cities that we make, if we do something like this from the ground up, need to be, much like the Venus Project is talking about, research centers, so that they can research how do we take construction to the next level so that it can be emissions free. And we need to be looking at like 3D printing and AI and things of that nature to try and automate and be able to make things in a more modular way, but also in a way that doesn't have those emissions. That's, if this city actually gets created, that needs to be the focus of the research, of the education, of that entire thing. There is such a huge service to humanity that will be done by the first city that is built like this if they do that. That's one of the main things that we need in research for the long term. How to create things in a way that can be as emissions free as possible. When I think about my policies, creating city not like this, but done up and down. When I think about the Venus Project or resource-based economy city, that first city that is built, that is what that first city needs to do. That research. How do you build the next generation of construction? Folks are mad for not having jobs, though. Well, and that's part of well, even a city like this, there's still jobs. There's still areas where there's businesses and jobs that have to work. There still needs to be programmers and people for security and stuff like that. Jobs won't go away completely. And because this is done through capitalism, that is going to be a problem. UBI is most likely going to be a requirement there for many people if they want to do it right, because there may not be enough jobs for everyone, much like you're pointing out. So, having universal basic services available for everyone, housing, food, education, healthcare, transportation, which is public transportation, right? Daycare and all that sort of stuff. All those stuff need to be made universally free for everyone who lives there. And that ensures that, and then also a level of universal basic income for the people who don't work, so that they have some way of getting stuff above and beyond what the services provide. Yeah, UBI. Yep. Good points. Very good points. Yeah, so the line may be developed in modules, and this is something that I expect they would be. And the Venus Project, the way they do their cities it would be similar. And if you can do them in modules, that is better, because that means you can, then they're modular. Then you can make one part and just copy and paste through the whole thing. And this will probably be the way that the neighborhoods are created. You've got your residential, your green space, your commercial areas, right? And you got your transport area. It's just chunk, just copy and paste. And will individuals, businesses, and other entities have creative reign over how their designs are expressed? Okay. Yeah, so what the concept... No, get down here, damn you! Get back here. Holy crap, sorry. Panic. Danger, Will Robinson. So one of the concepts I had, and I talked about this in my December 2020 Q&A thing, that one thing that I expect a resource-based economy to have, or a futuristic city like this to have, is the ability to create walls that are movable. So that you may have a set amount of space for your domicile, for your living space, but then you can move your walls so that you change the configuration for them. I think that's going to be that is a technology that we are going to need in the long term to ensure that we can maintain the maximum use of our spaces, having movable walls. Okay. And then that will allow the creativity inside the individual spaces. You can arrange it however you want. Super important. Independent expression of built form is an intrinsic part of conventional cities, but may not be possible with such as rigid structure as the line. This raises questions about whether people would warm to it. Creating and maintaining a vision. The line was to be completed by 2025. Holy fuck, that's soon. In a desire to revolutionize urban living. With construction yet to begin in earnest, it remains to be seen whether such a complex megacity can be completed so soon, as the project proposal makes precious little mention of important factors such as community structure, diversity of household types, likely demographics, governance, individual rights, equality of rights, property ownership, access to social services, civic involvement and citizenship, tolerance of diverse religions and spiritual beliefs. Line promises to have human experience at its heart, that there will be progressive laws and healthcare will facilitate individual empowerment. Okay, well, progressive for a conservative Islamic fundamentalist government, I guess your mileage may vary. We'll have to see what that says, right? But maintaining this vision may be difficult as new immigrants bring their own values, right? Is this? Yeah, so here's another picture of it, kind of from a farther away. Not a picture, artist's rendering. A nation building project. The line appears to be a massive exercise in nation building. Its planned 9 million population represents a 25% increase on Saudi Arabia's current population of 35 million people. Oh, the marketing focus of the line is on environmental sustainability, technology, luxury and professional lifestyles, innovation, and a strategic location. So if they're looking to do this, so they only need to make 4 of these to fit their entire population in. So over 10 years, they could have their entire population living in one of these. This is the sort of scale that countries need to be looking at doing. Right here. That is insane. The marketing focus of the line is on environmental sustainability. Okay, I just read that. Blah, 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 blah. This suggests its planners and designers intend to produce a novel and exemplary urban development that will rapidly transition Saudi Arabia to a post-carbon future. This is exactly what we need to be doing. This is the way people need to be thinking. All the elements are there to do that, but from a planning and construction perspective, it will require enormous strength of will, financial heft, and capability. It remains to be seen how successfully the line will attract residents it needs to succeed. Okay. We can't even build a bridge in 3 years. Fair. Right, and is that next to an ocean? It's oh, you're right. You're right. So it's right here. So okay, Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. Okay, so here's the sea. Okay, here we go. Here's the sea, the Gulf of. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I never even thought about that. So yeah, ocean rise is going to be a significant concern for this. Good point. And that's why in my policies, I do say we need to be looking at first how Trump responded when he was questioned about how to deal with Hurricane Florence. Pay her the same. Oh, Jesus. Oh. Yikes. Yikes. So where is all the materials supposed to come? Yeah, that's a good question. We don't know. They're still trying to get this financed. I bet you China, a lot of it will come from there. But I don't know. They haven't talked about that yet. We have one more article to go over that will talk about this, but yeah, we'll have to see if anything comes of this. All right. Guess this is the title. No. We're planning on doing this in the next, well, by 2025. So we'll definitely see where, if this actually gets funded, where they're going to get it from. They could pull it from the surrounding areas. I don't know how much of those resources that Egypt themselves will have. I mean, there's just a lot of technology in here because it's going to be a smart city. So I imagine if they get it funded, that China is going to be a huge part of that. Not just for the technology, but also the work to do it. Because like China's doing a lot of work in Africa for that sort of a thing. Selling oil. Oh, sure. The money to sell, sure. Yep. I mean, the fossil fuel industry is making bank through crisis profiteering. Yeah, they definitely have the money to do it. That's definitely not a question. It's a matter of whether they can get a hold of the resources, which they should because they have the money, right? All right. This is from 2 November from Dezeen. Not sure what that is. All those complicit in NEOM's design and construction are already destroyers of worlds. So it sounds like this one is going to be a little bit critical. Let's see what they have to say. Architects working on the NEOM mega project in Saudi Arabia, including the 170-kilometer city, The Line, must decide whether they are content to be complicit in an ecological and moral atrocity. Whoa, writes Adam Greenfield. In April 1954, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist regarded as the father of the atomic bomb and a crucial part in the American thermonuclear weapons development program, was hauled before a panel of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and questioned about his political affiliations. These hearings are now remembered chiefly for the way Oppenheimer explained the intellectual appeal of atomic weapons work for an engineer, even one as ethically serious as he was. When you see something that is technically sweet, he testified, you go ahead and do it. Yeah, regardless of the ramifications of doing it. Part of this has to do with humanity's desire for novelty. You know, we see that this is a possibility. We just want to see, well, what happens when we do it? It's our curiosity. It's that drive for novelty. It's Oppenheimer's words that come to mind when I think of the architects, designers, management consultants, and futurists now busily at work on the planned Saudi mega project NEOM, for which ground is recently broken in the Arabian desert. Okay, so they're starting to do something. Maybe we'll look at that. NEOM's most notable feature is the linear megastructure, creatively dubbed The Line, that will supposedly extrude twinned 150-story buildings in 100 miles across the desert, with less than the distance between two New York City avenues separating them. Plant a city for $9 million in the slot thus created. On some level, the appeal of working on a project like NEOM is straightforward. NEOM has other facets as well, notably the planned Trojana Winter Sports Resort recently awarded the 2029 Asian Winter Games, but it's the line that people are thinking of when they invoke the broader project. How are they going to have Winter Games in Egypt? Okay. We'll have to look up that too, because that's kind of interesting. It's a little as if someone had taken Super Studios' 1969 Continuous Monument as a neat suggestion rather than a pointed critique. What is that? Okay, I'll share this if you want to take a look at it. On some level, the appeal of working on a... Okay, blah, blah. Okay, on some level, the appeal of working on a project like NEOM is straightforward. Architecture will always be attracted to wealth, firstly for structural reasons that are more or less obvious. Unlike other expressive pursuits, it takes a certain threshold quantity of money and power to get things built in the material world, and there's no question that NEOM's patron, Saudi Crown Prince and Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman, architects have a client willing to hand them what is, in comparison to other projects, an effectively unlimited budget. Architecture is often drawn to authoritarian regimes as well, for no other reason than their ability to do things by decree. Yeah, and when I talk about authoritarianism, this is pretty much the only benefit of authoritarianism, that when they decide to do something, shit just gets done. And that's kind of one of the reasons why China is doing so well, that they're decided to do it and no one stands in their way. That's why China's been very, very successful, which is good for them. China, exactly. Between the commercial considerations that dictate what kind of floor plates are rentable, the hemming in of floor area ratio by zoning, and 10,000 other conditions on building form, the regulatory and market imposed constraints of working in Western democracies mean that you'll never get to explore the outer reaches of your imagination. Yes, yep. I'm sure they'll compensate the current residents they're displacing. Right. That's one of the issues with this. The line is tearing through tribal lands, which I expect, they're just gonna get the boot, and then that's gonna be it. If I were doing something like this, and I wouldn't do it aligned, but that would be one of the things that I would demand, that anyone who is negatively impacted be given a free place to live within this, because that's a huge problem. Good point, very good point. Saudi Arabia is a pariah and needs to be treated as such. Joe Biden meets Mohammed bin Salman. So, dude, let's fist bump, right? Yeah, that's Biden's shitty. He's a capitalist. They always talk well, but end up, doing their fascist things. Worse, the city is a roiling pit of contention crammed to its limits with fractious constituencies, all of whom somehow need to be accommodated simultaneously. It is easy to imagine a certain kind of architect, and I think it's fair to say we all know people like this, and may indeed have someone specific in mind, wondering how they are ever supposed to get their Howard Rourke on when they're constantly forced to placate dreary, unimaginative civilians in this way. And along comes someone who encourages you to dream big, assures you that whatever you imagine can and will be built, and best of all, offers you a fat purse for sharing the contents of your beautiful mind with the world. How can this be anything but a dream? Exactly. This is, again, an autocracy, an authoritarian autocracy. When they decide to do something, they can do it. Hopefully, I hope they are able to get it done in a sense. So we have this first really real look at creating a city like this. Now, obviously, there are significant environmental problems with this and other humanitarian problems with this. But I hope some of that does get rectified and they change the model to mitigate some of those issues. Not likely, but, we can hope. If you accept money to work on any aspect of the NEOM project, you need to know that you are complicit. That is true. But the dream comes at a cost, a twofold cost, actually. The first aspect involves putting not merely your feelings, but everything you know about the climate crisis well to one side. True. NEOM is being planned at a time when wet bulb temperatures in the Arabian desert already exceed 20 degrees Celsius across half the year and are projected to spike sharply higher by the end of the century. Such conditions make the desert literally uninhabitable in the presence of massively energy-intensive cooling operations. Yep, that's true. Most recent reputable study anticipates significant risks on human survivability in the Arabian Peninsula unless strict climate mitigation takes place. If you're going to work on NEOM, then you have to manage the cognitive dissonance of designing as though this were not in fact the case. Yeah, and doing something like this, you also really, as an integral part of your plan, you have to be doing environmental conservation and undesertification, basically taking the area around you and turning it into greenland, planting trees, plants, and doing everything you can to make the area around you green again. I mean, that's just part of climate change, making things green again, because you do that, then over time that is going to reduce hopefully mitigate the issues with climate change, reduce the overall temperatures, and eventually will bring rain. So that entire stretch, within miles of the line, if it ever gets built, needs to be a massive, giant-ass conservation project. If not, Yeah, what they're saying here is exactly right. The second is more serious still. It involves the fate of the Huaytant tribespeople forcibly displaced from Tabuk province to make for the coming of Neom. In April 2020, Saudi security forces reportedly shot Abdul Rahim al-Huwadi dead in his home after he posted videos protesting the clearance of communities inconvenient to the government's plans. Yep. And just last month, a Saudi court handed down death sentences to his brother, Shadley, along with Ibrahim al-Hawadi and Ataullah al-Hawadi, also involved in protests. Heard about this Quebec guy that broke the record of planting the most trees in a day? I have not, no. Got a link, throw it in there. You can take a look at it at some point. Okay, so the prince had the tribal leaders murdered. Good stuff. There's no other way to say this. If you accept money to work on any aspect of the Neom project, hold on. Yeah, you need to know that you are complicit in these acts of violence and cultural erasure. So yes, there's no question whatsoever that resolving the design and engineering challenges posed by dropping a 100-mile linear city in the middle of uninhabitable desert makes Neom a technically sweet project, if that is, the above-mentioned fundamental thermodynamic constraints are even amenable to resolution, which is highly doubtful on our rapid and catastrophically heating planet. But that really oughtn't be your central consideration. What should weigh most significantly in your calculus is whether the satisfaction of working on this project and the compensation that attends that work will ever compensate for your participation in ecologically moral atrocity. Yeah, so that's, there are issues, much like he's talking about with the, the murder of these three people, probably tribal leaders. That is a huge problem. And the video won't get into it too deeply, but this is a problem, huge problem. And that's one of the issues with building out like this, building in a line. Takes up a lot more space. It is especially important for you to understand as well that whatever your intention, you will not be able to be the voice of reason in the studio or represent the unheard. True. Do not deceive yourself into thinking that any amount of painstakingly marshaled, coolly presented evidence can defer so much as 1 hour of progress on a project that partners have decided is key to their practice's future. Yep, because capitalism. Money. If anything, your very presence as a critical voice can be used to demonstrate that all perspectives were considered. True. The only tenable move in such a situation is not to validate the premise by furnishing it with the imprimatur of your labor. I address these words specifically to those working on Neom at Morphosis, Zaha Hadid Architects, and other studios, but also the architectural profession and its allied industries more broadly. I can tell you, I can't tell you what you should or shouldn't do. You're the only one who knows how well you sleep at night. And this is really one of the reasons why for every project, there needs to be a study done on the effects on humanity and the effects on the environment. That is the first part of, that should be the first part of all planning. And then once you figure that out, then you can go on with either larger scale planning or not planning in that case, if there are such significant impacts such as to tribal people and on the environment. We do know what happened with Oppenheimer's project though, and we know what became of him. He could only look on his work and solemnly reflect, now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Neom is not, it is true, atomic obliteration or anything remotely like it, but it has already brought death, and in carving a line through a living, breathing community, all those complicit in its design and construction are already destroyers of worlds. Yeah, that is true. All right, I'll check these articles here and see if they have anything we want to go over. Oh, drone footage reveals the line. Okay, so it is under construction. Okay, not a lot here. Let's take a look at this video. Okay, this is 19 October. All right, let's read this one. This one isn't too long. Drone footage reveals the Line megacity under construction in Saudi Arabia. This is from 2 weeks ago, a little more. Footage released by aerial photography company Sky shows work commencing on the Line megacity, which is being built as a part of the NEOM development in Saudi Arabia. The drone footage shot by Sky shows construction underway on the linear city, which is being built in northwest Saudi Arabia. In the video, numerous excavators can be seen digging a wide linear trench in the desert. Within the trench, foundations for the city, which is planned to be 170 kilometers long, are expected to be built. Wow, they're not fucking around. The works could also show preparation for an underground transport system that is planned to be built underneath the length of the city. Unveiled earlier this year, the line has been designed to house 9 million people. It will be 500 meters tall and have a mirrored facade. Okay, so here's a nice picture. Well, not nice, not a nice picture, but a picture showing quite well breadth of it, just tearing through the landscape. Look at that. However, experts refuted the project's sustainability and livability claims. That'll be interesting. Okay. Check this one next. Oh, so this is their winter. Oh yeah, okay, so let's take a look at this. I'm assuming this is on top of Neom. Oh, probably towards the mountain area. Okay, let's see what they have to say. This is from the 5 October, so over a month, for exactly a month ago. Saudi Arabia has announced that it has won the right to host the 2029 Asian Winter Games at its Trojana Resort, which is being designed by Zaha Hadid Architects and so on as a part of the NEOM development. Okay, so the question is, will this be a part of the line or not? It doesn't look like it is. Okay, so this is not a part of the line. How's the line compared to this? Okay, so this is what they're looking to build. It's beautiful. All right. So here, rendering of it. Oh, there's water up here. Look at that. Waterfall? That's not going to last. All right, sustainability. I'll go and throw this in there for you. So you can see what they have to say. Sustainability and livability claims of Saudi 170-kilometer city are naive, say experts. Following the Saudi Arabian government's unveiling of plans for an enormous linear megacity in the desert, urban design experts have expressed skepticism about whether its utopian vision is realistic. There would be so many physical environmental phenomena that would have to be dealt with to achieve the incredible minimal and singular character that the renderings propose, said Marshall Brown, director of the Princeton Urban Imagination Center and an associate professor of architecture at Princeton University. Philip Oldfield, head of the Built Environment School at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, warned that the huge embodied carbon cost of construction will overwhelm any environmental benefits. C40 Cities Director of Urban Planning and Design, Helene Chartier, argued that she would not want to live in a place where it is so narrow, while architect Winnie Moss said he would love to live in such a kind of environment. Here's another rendering which we've already seen. Yeah, so it's right next to the water, which is, going to be a huge problem. The oil-rich Middle Eastern state recently unveiled dramatic images of the line depicting 2 giant mirrored walls running straight and parallel for 170 kilometers across the desert. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, Is it feasible? These images project a degree of control which is very difficult to retain, especially over a period of time, even in a very autocratic society, he said. That is where I start to become a bit dubious. I don't mean to talk about this in a conservative way, but I think there would be so many physical environmental phenomena that have to be dealt with to achieve the incredibly minimal and singular character that the renderings pose. So let's say it would probably not look like it is shown on the sketch for sure. It will not look like other kinds of densities. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's I would not do that profile with only 2 bars going straight up. That doesn't make sense in terms of variety, in terms of wind pressure, in terms of keeping cold air in. Yeah, and that's kind of one of my complaints about it, is that it's flat. And if it's flat, you're going to be much more directly and much more affected by weather, wind and rain and that sort of a thing. And that's why you need to, it should be round in some way, rounded to mitigate and ablate the wind pressure and rain pressure and that sort of a thing. Despite harboring some criticisms of the design as shown in the images, the non-porosity of the outer walls, for example, Ma is positive about the overall concept. Blah, blah, blah. I'd love to live there. Yep, I would find it interesting too. Don't want to live there. Okay, in practice, the quality of life in the line would rest heavily on its maintenance and management, according to University of South Wales Oldfield, who has researched the experiences of people living in very large structures. Some of the internal spaces at the line look incredibly alluring: lush atria, vast cavernous interior spaces, Grand Canyon-esque in scale, with residents perched on the edge enjoying picnics, he said. Even if these were built, the satisfaction of residents would mostly be informed by how spaces are operated and managed, not how dramatic they look. That is true. What rules will be set? Can visitors use all of the spaces? Which are public, which are private? Will you be allowed to have a picnic on a ledge above a 200-meter high atrium? Call me a cynic, but I highly doubt it. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, if you have a whole bunch of green space and you can't use it, of course, that's going to be a problem. This would require a phenomenal quantity of steel, glass, and concrete. Now, to counter this sort of argument, I mean, we're already building cities with a shitload of shitload of steel, glass, and concrete, right? I mean, cities are already being built. So it's not that we don't have it. It's just that they want it all at once. I mean, we've got millions of cities around the world. It's just that they want all this stuff in one city all at once. I think it's going to be a supply issue, which if something like this gets built, there may be, unless there's already an existing supply sitting and waiting so that the rest of the supply for the rest of the world isn't affected, then there's going to be some supply and inflationary issues to take into account. To expect that we would have a consistent experience one way or the other, the extremes being misery versus complete bliss, seems unrealistic considering it's 170 kilometers long, he said. With the extreme compactness and absence of cars enabled by its high-rise linear layout, plus the generous vegetation depicted in the renderings, the line has been presented as a more sustainable alternative to conventional cities. Okay, the element which I find intriguing is that it's making this canyon-like space so there could be a big temperature drop in the middle city gap, he said. That is a technology that could be used to find ways in dealing with increasing desertification. In that sense, he added, it puts a finger on a truly weak point of the planet. But Oldfield is concerned about the embodied carbon impact of building the line and all the necessary associated infrastructure, particularly considering its enormous height and strength it would need to withstand wind loads. Yeah, that's going to be a huge issue. You cannot build a 500-meter tall building out of low-carbon materials, he said. This would require a phenomenal quantity of steel, glass, and concrete. Oldfield had estimated that building the line would produce upwards of 1.8 billion tons of embodied carbon dioxide, equivalent to more than 4 years of UK's entire emissions. So the next question would be, so for the amount of carbon that was put in from the construction, and if you move 9 million people in there, how much carbon is saved per year? That's the real question there. Building housing for 9 million people would always be quite carbon. Well, right. That's what I was saying, earlier, that, I mean, there's no way to get around the carbon footprint of building new stuff. We're building new stuff every day. The carbon footprint's there. And that's why I say that you building the first city like this, the most important part of that city needs to be a research center looking at how to create a low carbon construction industry so that you can build more cities like this, but without the carbon footprint. That needs to be the main goal of that city. And that's when the Venus Project, Venus Project doesn't necessarily talk about it from that standpoint, but I do. Like if you go to this post here, this is exactly what I talk about in here. If a resource-based economy was to be a thing, those first cities should be research cities that would look at and figure out the technology to automate the building of these cities, but also to reduce the climate impact of it as well. That has to be done. Okay. Did we finish that? Yes. Okay. So the question here is, putting 1.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide in there, how much fewer carbon is being added by the operation of this city, right? When you move those 9 million people in there, how much is saved year after year after that? Okay, my feeling is this vast embodied carbon would overwhelm any environmental benefits that a small footprint provides, he said. So again, when you're looking at this, right, the carbon footprint. So when you're building this, again, so which people and for what reason would they move there? Seems like a new forbidden city. From the previous article, it sounded like they were looking at immigrants for some reason. Which I think is kind of ass backward. They should, like I said earlier, they could build 4 of these and put their entire population into 4 cities, and or 4 or 5 cities, something like that, and then they would be done. They would have these super efficient mega cities. But the first article we read seemed to imply that they were bringing in immigrants, I think, but I don't know for sure. They didn't say specifically how that was going to work. We'll need to find more information on that. So here, okay. Okay, I'll say, right, if you're gonna build something like this, especially here in the desert, de-desertification needs to be a primary part of it. So working on greening this desert has to be a primary goal of what you're doing here as a way of dealing with the carbon footprint, right? But also just the ecological and environmental conservation plan of building something like this. Because the goal for every building project, as much as possible, not that it is to be a carbon negative. And that's what my policies talk about. I need a circular economy. And actually, I'm thinking about changing, not just sustainable, but carbon negative. What the hell's word am I using? Carbon entropy, change, centropy, regenerative. So regenerative. So as much as possible, you should be looking to shift to whatever you're creating should be regenerative as much as possible. To help compensate, not just compensate for any environmental harms, but also to make the world a better place. So greening this whole area, greening all of it. And a byproduct of that will be, of course, taking in carbon from the construction of this, but also greening this area will also lower the temperatures in the area. It may eventually bring in water and rain and that sort of a thing. That's a huge, it has to be a huge part of this. If it's not there, I mean, they're already not doing it right, but they're doubly not doing this construction right if that is not a part of what they're planning. Okay. Utopian thinking is important. It helps us challenge the preconceptions in the built environment that have generated conventional outcomes, which we know contribute to environmental degradation. I think sustainability and livability arguments here are naive. Let's see. Oldfield and Chartier also point out that despite its small footprint, the length and nature of the line's walls could cause biodiversity issues, including for migrating birds for whom large mirrored structures are highly dangerous. Yes, this is going to be a huge ass problem. Huge ass problem with the biodiversity issues. The video we'll watch next, she'll go into that. She's an architect and she'll talk about that. And that is such a big problem. In terms of biodiversity, what does it mean to create a big bar like that cuts the environment? What does that mean for animals? How can they cross? Question Chartier, we know that highways create lots of problems. Yeah, again, all projects, environmental impact, human impact, and then go from there. And both argue that densifying existing cities should be the focus if we are to make more sustainable urban centers. Right, and I'm about that too, density. Not necessarily density, but concentrating people in one space, but people need to have a lot of space to live in, which is why you take the cities, much like they're talking about, and trying to build, giving people lots of space. But instead of building out again in the line, you build up and you build down. There's lots of advantages of building down. Get access to geothermal heating, geothermal cooling, and all sorts of things like that. A part of me thinks this may be a distraction. I think it's interesting to have this discussion. I don't want to criticize, but part of me thinks that this may be a distraction for the real decisions we can make, said Chartier. It's better to consolidate a good model. Okay, what does that mean? The concept behind the line is not entirely novel. Large linear cities have been proposed multiple times in the past, accompanied by similar arguments about efficiency. As long as it goes 1882, okay, we've already gone through that. More recently, Peter Barber, okay. None of these have been built. Okay, to even imagine what this would be like once it was completed or what would happen over time, even things like how much raw material it would require to build, how much force it would take to pump water through it from end to end, what happens to things like wind and heat at such a scale is not possible with existing comparisons, said Brown. Yeah, and this would take significant computer modeling to even have a... You should be able to afford that. Okay, here we go. Okay, any questions or comments on that so far? We got this video. She's an architect. This is the first time I've ever watched any of her videos, but she does a really good job of breaking down the significant issues with this. Larger. Okay. All right, any last questions before we watch this? This is about 17 minutes, and she does a really great job of looking at the issues with this. 5, 4. Lily Bear, hey girl, how you doing? Good to see you. We've covered some climate change stuff, but we're looking at, we've read like 3 articles on the construction of this in Saudi Arabia. It's the line, part of the NEOM project. And so it's pretty interesting, but we're going to watch a video here of this lady's an architect. It's the first time I've watched any of her videos. And she's going to kind of break down the significant issues with the construction of constructing a city like this. Oh my God. Here, like right here. All right, let's go ahead and do this. Let me know if this is loud enough as well.
So, over the past couple of weeks, some of you have directed me to this very strange project. It's a city that's 170 kilometers long, 500 meters tall, and it's basically a line cutting straight across a desert with a facade made of mirrors. And you can travel from one end to the other end in just 20 minutes. It's got an ultra super high speed public transit, which eliminates the need for cars and prioritizes walking. At first I thought it was a metaverse project, but it is a real project. The initial estimates for this project was $500 billion, and now they're estimating at $1 trillion. And it's expected to house 9 million residents. There's been a lot of marketing around this, so let's unpack this project a little bit from the design and urban planning point of view. So a little bit of context. NEOM is a part of the Saudi government's bigger initiative to diversify the economy away from oil. And as a part of their plan, they're investing heavily into infrastructure projects, as well as education, tourism, research, anti-aging technology, and there's a really big focus on future industries like renewable power. And the Saudi Arabian government set up an entire zone for the NEOM developments in an area called Tabuk. There's areas that's already finished construction, including a seaside resort, a massive development for the royal family, and an airport directly connecting to Riyadh, which is the capital of Saudi Arabia. The line is probably the most public and heavily marketed part of this NEOM developments. The graphics to date have been really beautiful and really compelling. According to Mohammed bin Salman, this concept has a bunch of advantages that's going to make this the city of the future. By the way, it's going to have 0 carbon emissions and it's going to run on clean, renewable energy. The city is going to be structured on 3 different levels. At ground level, you're going to have your pedestrian zone. There's going to be no roads and no cars, and there's going to be tons of parks and trees to encourage walking. The second level functions as a service level with shops and other commercial spaces. And on the third level, you got your goods and transportation with this ultra high-speed transit system. This connects the different city modules so that all of your activities can be done by public transport or by walking. And all of your daily needs can be met pretty much within a 5-minute walking distance. This whole idea is built on the premise that most big cities are born out of the Industrial Revolution, and they were built for machines and cars and industry rather than for people. The line would save humanity from this commuting nightmare. But is a rigid line really going to meet people's needs? And is this really the most conducive shape for a city? There's just a lot of questions that come up when I look at this. The first one was the design's impact on the natural habitat. I mean, if the focus really is on green technology and it's designed for sustainability, why does it literally cut through the surroundings? You know, it looks like it's forcing its way into this irregular terrain, and it doesn't even take advantage of the coast, which to me seems like the most natural thing to do. I studied fragmented landscapes and wildlife corridors in architecture school when I was doing my project in the Korean demilitarized zone, and there's thousands of instances throughout the world where natural habitats have been fragmented from roads or buildings. It stops animal migration, it kills off weaker animal species, it limits genetic diversity, it creates inbreeding, which creates genetic disorders. This is really just to name a few. And one of the things that humans can do to help these situations is to create these wildlife corridors. And honestly, I don't know if this was overlooked because the project is in a desert, but even within a desert, there's thousands of animals and plant species like lizards, snakes, turtles, sandcats, hares, like literally thousands. And I would assume, especially as you get closer to the water, you would have more animal species. So creating this massive 170-kilometer wall, it sounds really problematic. Also, this giant mirrored wall is going to reflect the light, and it's going to create these two really hot heat zones, and it's going to fry everything around it, not to mention birds flying into it. The second thing is transportation. How does this extremely long line cut transit time compared to a rectangle or a circle? The proposal relies on this super fast transit system that's going to take you from one end to the other in just 20 minutes. That would mean that the train runs at 525 kilometers per hour if you're not accounting for all the stops. The fastest train in the world is the Shanghai Maglev, which runs at 460 kilometers per hour. There's also successful examples of how transit has been incorporated into the streetscape at the fraction of the cost of these bullet trains. I feel like this design and this concept of the line is creating unnecessary issues and trying to solve that issue with expensive technology. And I think design should provide the best organic solution, and we should use technology to improve on that. Also, organic cities, they grow. You know, how is this line gonna allow for growth? Do you just keep extending the line, like adding more modules? Or do you add perpendicularly, in which case it wouldn't be a line anymore? Also, if you look at studies on innovation throughout history, like Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson, he says that innovation grew exactly when cities started to grow. And that's because there's a lot of cross-pollination and accidental meeting of ideas. He describes the different environmental examples that breed innovation, and every single instance, it's more of a maze than a straightforward line. So even if the city's been programmed so that you can access your grocery store or your local coffee shop within a 5-minute walking distance, if they're spending all of this money on it, I'm assuming that they're gonna want innovators and leaders to come live here. But a linear, rigid city just doesn't really seem like the right kind of environment for the breeding of ideas. There's also the pure logistics of this as well. For example, let's say you're making some mac and cheese, but you realize you don't have any butter. And how can you make any mac and cheese without any butter? And so you decide to quickly go to the grocery store. And if you want to do it fast, you have to walk, which with this type of verticality, you have to take the stairs if you want to do it quick. But if you have mobility issues, you're forced to take the elevator, which we all know is a little bit slow. And as we've seen from the pandemic, it's the perfect breeding ground for disease. There's some talk of, again, another high-tech vertical transportation system, which I'm sure will help revolutionize transportation in a lot of already dense cities. But putting these constraints at the outset of the design to serve this very rigid concept, I don't know how sensible that is. Also, do you think we're going to be able to cycle here? We all know cycling to your daily commute increases health, lowers stress and obesity, but you need roads of some size, which this design doesn't really seem to allow for. So, do you need to go to the basement floor to ride your bike? I don't know. I'm also not super sure how much daylight you're going to be able to get in there. This gray box is residential, but if you live all the way over here, that's a pretty unpleasant situation for you, and you're not going to be able to get a lot of daylight. So maybe the ones on the lower level are the servants and the workers, and up here, that's where all the millionaires live. If this gets built, I'm sure they're going to figure out a way to properly ventilate and structurally support this, but I think it's going to come at a serious cost. Every structural engineer is going to tell you that putting up a massive slab of wall is going to create some serious lateral stability issues. So that means all of this is going to need to have some beefy structure. This is the classic thermal convection diagram. The desert gets up to 55 degrees Celsius. That's 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So if the roof of this thing stays open, like in the renderings, you're gonna need some serious cooling in there. Or maybe they're just counting on all of these areas being shaded most of the time. But then I'm kind of curious, how do you get all of this lush greenery, right? These are only the handful of the many issues with this concept. I feel like a lot of unnecessary constraints have been created to serve this very simple concept. It reminds me of like an architecture student project that inevitably gets ripped apart during a crit. But let's say that they're able to resolve the issue of daylight, of walkability, they can make trees levitate, and sunlight can bend geometry. But in the end, the question is still, who is gonna live here? You know, what kind of communities are they gonna have? This is a $1 trillion project, right? And they're estimating that it's gonna cost even more because all of these technologies still have to be developed, and they're really trying to get the state of art for everything. The Saudi government is obviously not going to foot the bill for everything. You know, that's partially the whole point of this entire marketing campaign. It's to attract investors. In typical developments of this size, they're going to phase it so that the profits from the first phase can fund the second phase, and the second to the third, and so on and so forth. But that would lead to old and new sections. And with typical master plans, these sections are designed very strategically so that the first phase, you know, even if it's a standalone, can be a livable and pleasant community. But with just a couple of strips of the line, which is the old section and which is the new section, and can it even function as a strip on its own? The idea of a massive city is really cool, but who's gonna want to move in there when it's just one little section? The Saudi government really wants to set up Neom as a free trade zone with its own tax system and legal systems that's separate from Saudi Arabia's super conservative legal system. And they're really trying to create an environment for global investors. So maybe it'll be a trade area where people come and go, but maybe few people will actually live there. They're also proposing that AI is going to help us live more efficiently, reduce waste, and live more comfortably. But people are already skittish about giving up their data, even for the most utilitarian needs. And so to expect people to do that for a city that's built and funded by an authoritarian government is, I think, asking for a lot. I have no doubt that this project.
If it was a European country where it wasn't an authoritarian regime, I think this would go over a lot well, and it would be done well. It wouldn't be done like a line. Like if some of the Nordic countries were going to do something like this, I think we would have something that we would be cheering, because they would care about the human rights issues, they'd care about the environmental issues and stuff like that. So it's just a lot of this. I think a lot of the issues we have with this, I think, are a byproduct of coming from Saudi Arabia.
Project is going to push the boundaries of technology. They're already making some really, really interesting advancements in desalination technology, but building a city from scratch instead of solving the existing problems is, in my opinion, the antithesis of sustainability. Many parts of Saudi Arabia don't even have a proper sewer system. The country's already full of failed or abandoned projects. And I think they need to be spending this money on improving the existing infrastructure and improving the lives of the people who already live there, you know, if sustainability and creating a better future really is their goal. What's also missing from their marketing campaigns is that there's thousands of people already living in this area. There's a tribal community that's been there for centuries, and Neom is displacing thousands of tribal members. And I think that brings us to the whole ethics behind all this. It is true that Mohammed bin Salman is making a lot of social and cultural progress in Saudi Arabia, especially for women. Since 2018, women were allowed to drive. In 2019, they were allowed to apply for passports, meaning they could travel without a male guardian. And they're also requiring equal pay for women for equal work. And, you know, before that, women got about half of what men were getting paid for the same type of work. And all of these reforms are a huge step for women's rights. But the truth of the matter is nobody can criticize the prince or his policies. You guys might have heard of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a Saudi Arabian journalist who was critical of the prince and his policies. He was actually dismembered and murdered in Istanbul. And CIA reports found that Mohammed bin Salman, although he denies it, is the one who ordered the killing. He's also been responsible for some serious human rights violations, including the arrest of a massive number of political activists throughout the country. In this project as well, there's been zero consultation of people who are going to live there or who live there already. And so, I don't know, maybe the purpose of this whole project isn't to build a real city after all. Maybe the whole purpose of this project is to repair the reputation and promote this positive image for the prince and his kingdom. And they're saying to international investors, look, women can drive now. You can wear what you want. We're open for business.
Hey, Hawksman, how you doing? Welcome. We're watching a video. This lady is an architect. She's kind of going through some of the issues with the line, with that of the NEOM project that they're looking at building within Saudi Arabia. American citizen, he even did. Yeah. That's, I wondered about that too. I think he was a citizen and he did work for some News Corp too. Yep.
Business. I don't want to get too bogged down into the politics here, but I think this is an interesting point to end the video. Architecture has been used throughout history to promote a political agenda, and the simpler the idea, the better. Especially today, with political messaging being delivered right to our fingertips as beautiful images and these grand utopian visions. It's really hard to distinguish what's what. It really makes me wonder, what is our role in this? I remember taking a course on ethics in architecture, and this architect, Carl Sapers, he outlined the ethical obligations of an architect. The architect has the obligation to, number one, make sufficient income to support the architect and his or her family. Number two, he has the responsibility to the sometimes conflicting requirements of serving the client. And number three, to the sometimes preceding and competing interest of serving the public. And number four, he has the responsibility to have devotion to the art of architecture. The second and third are actually outlined in the AIA or AIBC Code of Ethics, and not all of these points are equal. If there's a conflict between any of these points, you have to put the client's interests over your own, and you have to put the public's interests over yours or the client's. What is the architect's responsibility when they're asked to come up with a concept like this? Anyways, I'll leave you guys with that. I'm really curious what you think, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, I think you'll also like the video where I talk about architectural concepts in sci-fi movies. I'll leave it right here. And with that,
I'll have to look at that sometime. All right. That's the last part I have planned for this topic. Any questions or comments on this? Yeah, Magoki does kind of sound like one of the libertarian paradises that they were trying to do, like Peter Thiel and his ocean mariculture thing. Yeah. It does kind of have that vibe to it, but I do think that this is not necessarily a line city, but large scale, creating whole cloth, large scale urban developments as a way of moving society forward. So like I say in my policies, we build these brand new cities like this. Well, not like that, but not like a line, but building up and building down, move people into it. Then you go and you recycle the old capitalist city, and you tear it down and you green it. That's kind of the way we need to move forward. Hopefully with a city that's built not as harmfully as this one is, that once you move people in, that the total carbon emissions from something built is, in a way as to be sustainable as possible, will be much less eventually over time than the carbon emitted from the actual building of it. And hopefully that first city built in such a way like this would, of course, look at developing the technology to create things as carbon negative as possible, if not regenerative. Like a big problem with this, much like she talked about, is this giant wall. A lot of carbon can be used to build a city. It could, yeah, it can be. I mean, there are ways of using carbon to make sure that construction can be carbon negative to an extent. And there's a lot of research being done in that, but not all of those ways can create a structure like this that has the structural integrity to build something this big. Some can, some can't. Hempcrete is one of those ways. Take hemp, which you grow it, which takes the carbon, sequesters it in the crete. That can't really use that necessarily for load-bearing construction like this sort of stuff necessarily, depending on how you make it. But there are ways to do it. But there still needs to be a lot more research done so that you can build something like this in a way that would be that would actually be carbon negative, even if sustainable. Something similar, some smaller municipal projects through some sort of bond issuance and zoning or something. Carbon can be very tough. Carbon can be very touch. What do you mean by that? Well, we could do it on a smaller scale, Magoki, but honestly, it needs to be done on this scale so that we can move a giant-ass amount of people in it, so you can have people there to do the research for the next generation of construction. Strong. Come here, Sean. Oh, definitely, but there's carbon emissions. The carbon emissions can be very strong, most definitely. The Starship from Tesla. Not Tesla. Whatever it is. Very strong there too. But yeah, this is sort of scale we need to be thinking, not a line like this. Again, we should be building up and building down, which my policies talk about. And that gives you a lot more options. Like here, I would take some of this and I would put just a shitload, take a bunch of that sand and put it up to here. And you won't get as much sunlight that way, but it becomes significantly more efficient. And you have the buttress here that you don't have to worry about the winds blowing against it and knocking it over or creating those shear stresses on the walls. So you've got the protection of the mounds of dirt next to it. That'd be one way to do it. And then you can, up here, use mirrors or up along the sides to project the sunlight inside. Control it that way. Okay. Why would you build a city in the right? And that's one of the questions that they ask. This is not the best place to put it. Now, what I was saying earlier is that if you're going to build a city in the desert, let's see if we can get a better picture of this so we can see it, because I was commenting on this. So if you build a city in a desert like this, a large part of your development program needs to be the greening, the conservation, if not de-desertification of the land on both sides of it. Help not just to offset the carbon of just creating a place, but as a way of trying to work towards making your development regenerative. The project is like Trump's wall. Yeah, that's to an extent you're right there, pan-Arabist Africanist. Yep. I assume they want air conditioning unless they want. Yeah, exactly. That's another reason why having it like this, standing up free like this, is going to be a problem. Why building it under the ground would be much more efficient as far as heating and cooling. And then if you build big deep enough, you get access to geothermal heating and cooling for this sort of a thing. There's lots of issues with this. A lot of issues with it. It's an amazing idea, but the implementation has a lot to be desired. All right. Any other questions or comments on that craziness? If you want to learn a little bit more about the resource-based economy, like the Venus Project and the way that they kind of envisioned building things, there are a whole bunch of links at the end of my post here talking about it. And my post here kind of talks about how resource-based economy might come into being and kind of the phases we might do it in. And I do talk about kind of doing the research and building the cities, and then building first cities, which generate the research to more efficiently build the next generation of cities. Am I aligned? Right, and that's one of the things that they're talking about. That it's not a circle, which is what the Venus Project works with, would be more efficient, and that's what they were talking about. The lady in the video was talking about that they would have to have a bullet train going 500 miles an hour to get from one side to the other, not including stops. So yeah, it's a problem. Lots of problems with it. Circle would be better. This is a pet project. Yes, that's exactly right. The Crown Prince is the one who's putting this together, and yes, that's exactly right. And because he wants it done, it's gonna, he has the influence to get he most likely has the influence and the money to fund it himself if he needs to, but he wants to get other people involved. So we'll see what happens. From the earlier article, it shows that they're already started working on it. So we'll see what happens. Got to start up politics first, or else you end up like Allende. Yes, this vanity project holds no such. Right. Well, you also, for the Crown Prince, he doesn't give a shit necessarily about a utopian ideal as far like Allende did, right? So he's still a capitalist, and capitalism is still a core driver of why he's building this city. It has nothing to do with, well, I don't want to say it doesn't have anything to do with making a better world. He does, but not in such a radical way as Allende did. So yeah, he won't get assassinated or invaded by the U.S. because his ideas aren't radical like Allende's was. But yes, politics we need to deal with. We can't deal with it really well until we get beyond monetary systems. We'll see. They said they want it done by 2025. We'll see what happens. And much like the lady was talking about in the video, hopefully they'll bring people from their city who are struggling and suffering, or from their country, bring them and put them into the city instead of having them struggling outside in these rural areas with no air conditioning, with no running water and sanitation, that sort of thing. I doubt they will, because there isn't a benefit to that. There isn't profit to be found in doing that. But if he was interested in human rights and really doing what's better for his people, that is what he would be doing. And that's how I would approach it. Honestly, if I were to, like, when I think about this sort of thing, if I had $1 trillion, 500 billion would be invested so we'd have money to keep supporting things. The other 500 billion would be used for building the first city. And then a large part of the population for that first city would be people who were struggling, homeless, and stuff like that, just to, try and do our part to help make the world a better place. So you take these struggling families, bring them in, give them access to the healthcare and education, all the basic services. But then you also have the roboticists, the architects, and construction people there to try and create that next generation of construction so that it's regenerative, if not carbon negative, or carbon neutral, and can automate the construction of the next generation of cities. When you can't criticize for fear of death and you end up with the riches. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's, much like the lady was bringing up, that is a huge problem. That is going to be a huge concern there, the civil rights aspects of it. it may end up having its own laws and everything like that, but you're there, and if you try to leave and you've like, if I were there and I were to write a huge blog post on him, we know how well that would go. How long would I live? Even if I was, in that free trade zone, could I get to that airport that was attached to it and not be murdered? Could I leave the country without being murdered? That only goes so far. Agreed. Good thing about a desert and you have that amount of money to spend is you have plenty of energy. Yeah, you could. But of course, the issue is, unless they're doing something like power satellites, that energy is going to be, intermittent. Not as intermittent as others, but because they're going to have sun all the time. But for something like this, I would concentrate on, again, geothermal or high altitude or power satellites or geothermal. Sure. She's architect. I'll go and share it again. I'll share her channel. I just looked quickly at some of the stuff some of her stuff. It's really just architecture oriented because she's an architect. I didn't see anything else there that looked interesting besides this. So there you go. You can check it out. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. $1 trillion is an unmanageable number for us plebeians. Yep, but I still think that's a conservative estimate for. Yeah, they said originally 500 billion. Now it's up to 750 billion. Yep. Anytime. So yeah, it could be more than $1 trillion. But this is the scale that we need to be thinking, honestly. Yeah, and I have a part of my policies talks about this very thing. We need to stop doing Olympic cities because they're a fucking waste. You build them and then they just, all that construction just goes to waste. It's a huge waste of materials and resources. All right, so this video talks about non-market housing as a concept, and I really like the. Yeah, this is about Starlight. How you doing? Welcome. This is about non-market housing. It's this is the first time I've heard about this concept directly like this. It's basically building housing which is built just for the purpose of just making the money. Making enough money to pay it off, and that's it. So that way prices are lower, and that has an effect on the larger housing market. Now this video does a pretty good job of talking about this topic, and it goes over a few different instances where there has been non-market housing and how it has affected the different housing markets.
Is your classic Vancouver
as far as prices and stuff like that. Yeah, I find it interesting too. I don't understand it quite well enough to integrate it with my housing policies yet, but it's something I have to put into my brain and figure out, at least talk about it somewhere in my policies. This is 16 minutes, so this will definitely take us to the end of the stream, roughly. Any questions or comments before we watch this? Can I share it? I'll share it again. There's the link for the video. Any other comments, questions before we continue? You don't want to be living in a concrete city? Are you a politician? I have run for office a little bit. This is my policy site here, and this is my blog. I like to say I'm far left. Anti-capitalist, and I promote resource-based economies. So if you want to see, you're dyslexic? Okay, not a problem. Not a problem. When the mortgage is done being paid for, if the rent stays the same, that's profit. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, that's profit. Yeah. So non-market housing is about keeping that rent as low as possible and just paying the bills, and that's pretty much it. He's just the middle spectrum Netherlands? Yeah, that's what you keep saying. But someday we'll see. All right, let's give this a watch.
Vancouver neighborhood. Seawall? Check. Outdoor athletic store? Check. Big boxy glass buildings? Check. And crazy expensive housing? Oh, you better believe that's a big check. Renting an Olympic Village is not cheap. For example, a 2-bedroom apartment in that building behind me will cost you $4,200 a month. A 2-bedroom in this building, $5,000 a month. A 2-bedroom unit in this building rents for $4,500 a month. And just across the street, a 2-bedroom unit in that building rents for $1,900. How's that possible? Who's behind this? And could that be the subject of this video? So, how is this building so affordable? Well, it's really quite simple. It doesn't make money. Let me elaborate. This building is owned by the Athletes Village Housing Co-op, a non-profit cooperative. Like the name suggests, the co-op isn't trying to make a profit from this building, so it sets rents that only cover the building's operating costs. Things like heat, water, electricity, taxes, mortgage payments, and maintenance. The building next door is a condo, and that 2-bedroom unit is owned by an individual or corporation who very much wants to make some money from their housing, so they can rent it out for, well, really whatever price they can get. Any money they make on top of their own operating costs is profit they can pocket for themselves. Sorry, I just explained to you how landlords work. The condo is an example of market housing. The price is set by the highest bidder. The Athletes Village Co-op is an example of non-market housing. The rent is set by just how much it costs to provide the housing. Why does housing like this exist? Well, it's because many people and organizations recognize that housing is, a need, and so they choose to provide housing without trying to make a profit. In some cases, there are charities such as churches and YMCAs who decide to build housing as part of their larger mission. There are nonprofit organizations specifically for housing who often own multiple properties and rent them out like a regular landlord. There are nonprofit co-ops where a group of people collectively own and manage a building and rent it to themselves. Then there's housing that's provided by the government through agencies like BC Housing. And within these categories, there are all kinds of specializations, such as housing for seniors, single moms, refugees, and, even Korean seniors. Well, I guess I know my retirement plans. Now, is it always affordable housing? Well, that part's a bit more complicated. Cutting out profits can certainly make rents a bit cheaper, but at the end of the day, it still costs a lot of money to build and operate any building. Some non-market housing does receive subsidies to make its rents really affordable, but without those subsidies, non-market housing rents start out pretty comparable to market rents. Take, for example, Hannelore Housing. It's a new non-market housing development by the Oak Ridge Lutheran Church. It didn't receive major subsidies, so it charges $2,400 for a 2-bedroom, which is, not exactly cheap. But what can make Hannelore Housing more affordable is time. Hannelore Housing is in an up-and-coming neighborhood called Oak Ridge. In a decade or so, this will likely be a major city center, where art transcends museums, music travels freely, style comes naturally, beauty is all around, and dance is part of life. Wow. Anyways, a regular landlord here would be foolish not to hike up their rents, but Hannelore Housing would keep their rents more or less the same, and over time, that would make its rents relatively affordable. That's why the Athletes Village Co-op seems so affordable now. $1,900 for a 2-bedroom was actually pretty typical for Olympic Village back when it was built in 2010. But today, the co-op is still charging more or less the same amount, while its neighbors have hiked up rents year after year. But there's one more thing that happens with even more time. You see, Athletes Village Co-op and Hannelore Housing took out bank loans to construct their buildings, so much of the rent you pay here goes towards paying off those loans. So what happens when they finish paying their loans? Well, the housing becomes cheap, like really cheap. That's been the case for this co-op from the 1980s, where rents for a 2-bedroom are only $1,000 a month. And the reason why is because it's fully paid off its loans. And that is why many believe non-market housing could be an answer to the housing crisis. Rents all over the province are skyrocketing, and in Vancouver, they're up 23% from last year. People are renting dens and solariums for about $1,000. For those who are trying to rent in this market, non-market housing promises a home at a stable price right now and an affordable price in the long term. But hold on. are we really making housing affordable for everyone here, or just the people who are lucky enough to get into non-market housing? If you look at Athletes Village Co-op and pretty much any other non-market apartment in this city, there are wait lists. It's really difficult to get in. And it makes sense. It's cheaper than market housing. So this initially made me feel pretty uneasy about non-market housing. It's great for the people who can get in, but what about everyone else? Could it ever be a solution to the broader housing crisis? Well, it turns out, actually yes. Let's say you build a lot of non-market housing, like thousands of units, no, tens of thousands of units, no, hundreds of thousands of units all over the city. You build and build and build until non-market housing is a huge player in the housing market. There are no wait lists, no lineups, no shortages. If you want to live in non-market housing, you can. Well, then you might end up with something like Vienna. In Vienna, 60% of the population lives in non-market housing, regardless of their income, and that has created an interesting effect on the larger housing market. When there is an abundance of non-market housing, private landlords have to compete with non-market housing for the same tenants. They can't afford to inflate rents because people will just apply for the non-market housing next door, where rents can be as low as 251 euros a month. This is known as an integrated or unitary housing market, where non-market housing is so ubiquitous that it actually keeps rents in the private sector from increasing too quickly. In fact, you can measure this effect in places that have lost non-market housing. In Amsterdam, the share of non-market housing has been steadily declining since the 2000s, and with less non-market housing to stabilize the market, rents have rapidly increased. I think that's the ultimate potential of non-market housing, why it's very much a solution to the broader housing crisis. Because when we build enough of it, it actually stabilizes rents in the overall housing market. But that is definitely not the case here. In Canada, non-market housing makes up just about 5% of the housing in our country, and at those rates, it has little to no influence on the wider housing market. So how do we change that? How do we build more non-market housing? Well, it helps to understand how non-market housing is built. Let's say you want to build non-market housing. What you first need is land. Some nonprofits like churches already have land, and sometimes the government can offer you public land for free or very cheap. But if those options aren't available, well, that's no reason to worry. Because at the end of the day, all you really need to build non-market housing is a positive, can-do attitude and money. You need money. Even if you own your own land, you still need to build something on it. And construction costs aren't cheap. So where does that money come from? Well, like I mentioned, in many cases, that money comes from a loan. Athletes Village Co-op and Hannelore Housing were able to get loans from Van City Credit Union to construct their buildings. In other cases, the government can actually require housing developers to pay for it. For example, at this location, the local government negotiated with the developer to build some non-market housing in exchange for the right to build more density on their land. The result? 233 market condos that subsidize 30 units of non-market housing that's run by a charity called 221A. But more often than not, funding for non-market housing is pretty complicated. For example, if you look at the funding summary for this nonprofit apartment in Cole Harbour, you'll see that it took a mix of 4 different grants, selling life leases for some tenants, personal donations, money from foundations, money from fundraising events, and a bank loan. Oh, and they also got the land for $10. If you can't tell already, raising all that money from all those different sources takes a lot of work, and it's really impressive that someone pulled it off. But that is not the process for how you build a lot of non-market housing. So what many have rightfully concluded is that creating more non-market housing will ultimately require more government funding. And the thing is, until very recently, our federal government basically stopped funding this sort of housing. If you look at a graph of new non-market housing units funded by Ottawa over the years, you can see that there is a 2-decade period where almost no new non-market housing was funded at all. Why we stopped investing in non-market housing is a very complex story for another time, but what's clear is that here in Canada, we've kind of assumed that the private market can meet our housing needs, that for-profit developers will compete with each other to offer us housing at the best price, without much government assistance. And before we assess non-market housing as a solution, I think it's pretty important that we understand that private market first. And why? it's not really working out. Private markets are pretty good at providing consumer goods like computers and t-shirts in the sense that when people want more of these items, the companies just make more. It would be wonderful if housing worked that way, but it almost never does. When there is demand for more housing, creating more of it is a complicated process. There are zoning bylaws in most cities that place heavy restrictions on how much housing can be built, and any changes to those rules bring out protests from local residents who are concerned about new buildings casting shadows, blocking views, or changing the character of their neighborhood. For example, in Kitsilano, a 5-story development that included non-market housing ended up being so controversial that it took 3 days of public hearings. One resident who opposed the building described it as dropping the ghetto on Kitsilano. All that fuss was over a 5-story building, not the Burj Khalifa. And it really goes to show, building more housing supply is very difficult. As a result, there is a scarcity of housing today. Vacancy rates across BC hover around 1.5%. And at those rates, landlords can basically name their price. And recently, this has produced a concerning trend. Investors such as pension funds, REITs, and residual income bros have aggressively entered the housing market. And in many cases, these investors don't buy these properties to build new housing, they buy them to take advantage of a low vacancy rate and raise rents. I think this CEO of a real estate investment firm said it best. We think there is a definite shortage of housing in Canada, and the good news for investors is that there is no easy solution in sight. He actually said that. When viewed this way, our housing crisis starts to look more like a feature of the private housing market, not a bug. So, is non-market housing the fix to all this? Well, yes and no. Many would argue that what we actually need to do is to fix the rules and barriers that are creating this housing shortage. And I think that's totally fair. In North America, we make it really difficult to build any housing, period. And even if we decide to build a lot of non-market housing, it will still run into those same barriers. Non-market housing still casts shadows, blocks views, and changes the character of the neighborhood. I think first and foremost, we need to change these rules and make it easier to build housing in general. But on top of that, evidence suggests that it isn't really a good idea to only focus on non-market housing to fix a housing crisis. Because if you only focus on non-market housing, you might end up with Hong Kong. The government here provides 46% of its population with non-market housing, but severely limits development in the private sector. Because of that, private sector rents in Hong Kong are some of the highest in the world, and people wait 6 years on average to get into non-market housing. Non-market housing is not a silver bullet solution that we can pursue while ignoring the rest of the housing market. It's all interconnected. If there's a shortage of housing in the private market, it will only place more pressures on non-market housing. But with all that being said, I ultimately think that non-market housing is still a critical part of fixing our housing crisis. I think to some extent, building housing supply is always going to have constraints. It isn't as simple as printing t-shirts and making computers. It will often be fundamentally at odds with other priorities we hold in our cities. Yes, some kind of trivial ones like protecting views, but also more understandable priorities like protecting wetlands or preventing suburban sprawl. And besides, there are other limits to housing supply that are frankly outside of our control. In Metro Vancouver, our land is limited by mountains and water on every side. That will always create the potential for housing to be scarce and for people to exploit that scarcity by making housing as expensive as possible. Given that reality, I think we should be treating non-market housing as an important counterbalance, something that limits people's ability to exploit a housing shortage in 2 key ways: adding more supply and setting rents that help to stabilize the overall housing market, sending a reminder to all of us that housing is ultimately for people, not profits. Okay, so I'm here to put my life savings of, several $1,000s into my Vancity checking account. Because, like I've hinted throughout this video, Vancity and the Vancity Community Foundation actually play a pretty important role in helping non-market housing developments get off the ground. Together, they created the Affordable Housing Accelerator Fund to help organizations get through the pre-construction process of non-market housing. Setting out to build non-market housing can be daunting. Before you finance your building, you need to prepare designs, create cost estimates, and have municipal approvals in place, and that all costs money. This is where the Vancity Affordable Housing Accelerator Fund comes in. It provides grants, expert advice, and low-interest loans so that nonprofit organizations have the resources they need to create a strong case for their developments. To date, it has helped over 4,200 units of housing get built in our province. Where you bank really matters, and every time you deposit funds into your Vancity account, you are literally helping new non-market housing projects get built in our province. Pretty neat, right?
All right, there you go. Now, one of the issues here, of course, is the private market. If there wasn't a private market for housing, then a lot of the issues goes away with just having non-market housing as a silver bullet. Oh, sure. It is right here. There you go. And so I haven't quite gone that far in my policies by getting rid of any private ownership, or actually any commercial ownership of property. All property should be privately owned or owned by like a non-market sort of housing. I need to meet with some people and talk about how we deal with the housing issue. It's not so cut and dry. I struggle with that aspect, but eventually I'll get there. Any questions or comments on this idea? They mentioned this non-market housing as co-ops. That's a good way to do it. Very good way of doing it. Yeah, well, because not this idea specifically, but of housing as a human right. How can we implement that to make sure that everyone has housing? The big issue for me is that local funding comes from property taxes. So how do we deal with housing and still fund everything with property taxes? Maybe it's not an issue. Maybe I just haven't connected the dots yet. I just don't know what that answer is yet. Here we get laws that make it impossible to own houses if you don't live there. Okay, yeah. See, that would be one way to deal with it. So there's no commercially owned housing at all, which would be one very good way around it. Then you don't have the issue with property taxes either, because you're still paying that, assuming you have that as a thing. Yeah, I need to spend more time on this topic at some point, trying to figure out what's the best way to deal with housing. I think ultimately, all housing should be non-market housing. There shouldn't be any commercial ownership of domiciles at all. And the governments should fund a lot of this very specifically. They should be putting a lot of money towards it. If you look at the line here, right, the sort of integration they have here, what I would do would be something more like this, but in a single building for non-market housing. You have a mixed commercial residential. Our thing is that a lot of people can't fork out 300. Yes, yeah, that is a shitload of money. A shitload of money. I couldn't afford it at all, not even a little bit. So you try and have, if you have non-market buildings which have mixed commercial residential, or something like that, that might help with it based on the assessed value. Right. Right, the assessed value, right, which is like point whatever percent, right? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know enough about that to put my brain through it to figure out a settled policy. I need to, because it's such an important thing. Housing as a human right. What is the policy to do? What is the policy to enable that? I don't know. I don't know. I need an answer though. I need to figure it out sometime. Non-market housing is a part of that. Community co-ops which own housing is a good thing. It might be a way to do that because then they could still pay property taxes, and then that kind of gets beat. Then I don't have to worry about that aspect of it because you're worried about like how schools will be funded. Right, that's exactly right. Right. Schools are paid through property taxes. County governments are paid through property taxes, right? Because that's property taxes fund all local spending for the most part. That's I mean, if property taxes aren't taken off the table and they're still paying it, then then there probably isn't a problem. But I don't have how that all works together. Make it not attractive to have a lot of children. well, we're not gonna have to worry about that in 100 years or so because climate change is going to make sure of it. But one thing that you'll find is as societies advance, as they become more first world, we have a population decline. America has a population decline. A lot of European countries have population declines. So if you really are worried about a population problem, you just make sure that the societies advance to first world status, and then the population will decline, and then now you have to worry about population decline. Should be divided up across state. Yes, yep, and that's something. I don't think I addressed that in there. I do address that within my educational policies that property taxes for schools should be split equally across all districts. I haven't quite gotten. That's a very good idea, Curly Bear. So I haven't messed with that part of it yet, but that's exactly right. That is what I would do. That way, your richer counties don't have much better infrastructure than the poorer counties. That's exactly right. That is what I would do. I don't talk about. I think I talk about housing in just the social, and that's it. Economic. So maybe it's just the non-market housing. So of course the issue with having non-market housing is the value, because typically property is valued based on how much income you can make off it. So if you have non-market housing, the value is going to go down significantly, over time because of how low the rents are. So the commercial spaces may have to be the ones that make up the difference, which means commercial property taxes will be higher versus see what I'm saying? There's a complexity there. How do you value property when it's typically valued in based off the amount of rent you can get for it? Over time, that value is going to go down because the rent goes down. Or maybe you keep the rent equal. Maybe you keep the property taxes based off the initial build cost. Property taxes based on value of the land and the improvements on the land, not the. Oh, okay. Yep, you're right. You're right. Right. Value of land and improvements, not the market. Okay. Yep. Okay. So that solves that problem. I gotta write that down. Value of land. Now, but the value of the land and improvements will be based off, because the value of the property. Kind of based off what you could buy it for. Well, okay, there's a direct correlation between how much you could buy it for and the value. Value, property tax. Okay. All right, guys, it is 5 o'clock. It's time for me to go. Girly Bear, thanks. I'm glad you showed up and you're giving me these ideas. I really do appreciate that. But you have to figure this out. Any like house can sell for $800, but if it was built in the 50s, then to replace that house would be a fraction. Yes, thank you, Gaming Mind. You too, man. Have a great weekend. House can sell for $800, but if it was built in 1950, then to replace the house would be a fraction of 800,000. Okay, so but how do you get to that? If you can only buy a house if you live there, then automatically. Right. That's exactly right, Analux. That would be part of that would be a way to help control property prices. It would keep them down and make them more affordable. That's one way to help combat it. Also, replacing that structure is the improvement of land, like new housing. Okay, all right. Yeah, so the cost to, yeah, so the construction costs aren't going to change that much. We have a sort of governmental institution to build for social housing. Yeah, and Alex, that's exactly what we need to be concentrating on, honestly. Heavy government subsidization of building this. That's very much what we need. Okay, so Gurley, yeah, so the cost to build a house is going to be what it is, regardless of whether it's commercial or private or something like that. Okay, so that would be a way to deal with it. Okay. Okay. The rent for social housing works with a point system. What the hell's that? One demerit for you. Your rent goes up. There's a point system based off income. Yes, I know. I haven't watched any Twitch streams in a very long time. MEC3 is one of the ones that I really want to meet. Yeah, I know. I want to meet her and have a conversation with her so that I can get my policies figured out. I really just need to carve out the time and contact her and meet with her and have that conversation, because getting this all figured out will be good for my policies. So good for me to have a solid handle on this, because it's one policy point that bothers the shit out of me because I don't have it dealt with. But yes, MEC3, she's awesome. She's way awesome. Everything has points, kitchen sink. Oh, okay. Well, points are basically equivalent to property value. Basic. Ish. Don't worry if she seems 30. Oh, she has a stalker? Oh, that sucks. Yikes. Okay. I'll have to contact her. I need to. I mean, I've been saying that for 2 years, right? 3 years now. I've been saying I want to have her on stream too, so we can have that conversation. But yeah, I need to. I really do need to. MAC3. Yes, it's true, but the person who has the house for rent can't ask. Okay, so it's rent control based off property. Okay, I see. Gotcha. Oh, that's pretty cool. Building feature. Roles. Prices. That's neat. You can ask a minimum for the amount the point house has. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, Girly Bear and Alex, all of you, thank you so much for your time. Really, this has been very educational for me too. Thank you for gifting me with your time. Everyone, have a great weekend. Stay COVID free. And again, I'll be streaming next week about 2 o'clock, hopefully right on time. 2 o'clock U.S. Central Standard Time. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much, everyone.